Very grateful to Catherine Gordon for being with us today. She serves in the Presbyterian's Office of Public Witness, and her expertise is helping equip advocates for lobbying for the causes that Presbyterians support. So Catherine.
Great, thank you. And thank you for inviting me. Just to check on time, how much time do you want me to go for?
10 minutes, how about that?
10 minutes, okay. So I want to start, I've been asked to sort of get into the nuts and bolts of how to do public policy advocacy. And we have a resource that I think that they're going to mail it out to you today. I'll just put it up on my screen. Make it just a little bit smaller. Okay, Holy Discontentment, Grassroots Advocacy and Organizing in the PCUSA. And what I found is that people can be very, get discouraged very easily in terms of organizing and advocacy. And I think it's best to look at it as a long-term, whatever you're doing is for the long term. It's a way of life. It's being faithfully persistent and letting go of the outcome and knowing that you never know what will have an impact. And look for the small victories in your advocacy. So our resource has information on meeting with your members of Congress, how to do telephone calls, letters, email, print media, social media, and also an analysis of power. This is just a brief intro. So sometimes it's very striking how intimidated some of our members are from meeting with their members. And so it's good to know that you do have power. Power is a product of relationship. Communities in which people have relationships with one another have an increased ability to act and control what happens in our collective and individual lives. And I think this network over the past few years is really trying to build those relationships and have more power, inviting our ecumenical partners to this network so that we are not just Presbyterians, but the faith community who are doing advocacy around these issues. And the more that we build these relationships, and even when you're doing congressional visits in your home districts, if you have other people who are also interested in doing advocacy around Syria, it's important to bring them with you on those meetings. So we do a brief analysis, a power analysis here, and then we ask you to think about what power do you have? What power does my group have collectively? How are my activities building power for my group's members and for this congregation or presbytery or this network? How are we channeling the power that we have to work with God for a more just society? So, and one of the things that we intentionally do in our advocacy is rather than work for, we work with. So we always invite our brothers and sisters and siblings who are on the ground around the world to work with us. And we ask them what they would like us to advocate for. So one of the major tools that an advocate has in their toolbox is meeting with members of Congress. They are there to meet with you. That is their job. Recently, we had a D-Min class come to our office for a class around immigration. And it was striking how intimidated our participants were for going to meet. And these were pastors who were active in their community, but they'd never met with their member of Congress. So we actually had to switch the order of our class around and to sort of calm the anxiety about meeting their member of Congress with a workshop around that. And once they did have their meeting, they came back very empowered, realizing that it's not something that should be intimidating. So these are just the nuts and bolts of requesting a meeting with your member of Congress. You get in touch with the office's scheduler, not the one in DC, but in your district office when you're meeting with in your home office. It goes into the details about how you should request the meeting, notes on what you plan to say, maybe a camera, and then materials to leave behind. We usually leave behind a one-pager. So what Billy read, your new ask document, that's what you would leave behind in your meeting. So when our office does legislative visits, we usually meet with staffers. But if you're a constituent, you will have a more likelihood of meeting with your member of Congress, and that would be about 10 to 15 minutes. So in preparation for that meeting, you should look up, you should get to know who your member of Congress is. So what committees they serve on, what they care about, what are certain points that you think would influence them. Are they a Christian? Would learning about the Syrian Christians influence them? So different areas of their background and interest that might be important for your what stories you tell. So this is just a way that you can set up your meeting if you're going with a group of people, or you could all do it if it's just you could perform all of these functions but it's good to have a facilitator who will introduce the group, introduce the reason for the meeting, and then a personal storyteller. A personal storyteller is key to every meeting. And I find that sometimes activists feel like they need to be experts and they go in with a lot of data and facts and figures. And if you're trying to change someone's opinion, sometimes that isn't actually the most effective way. Sometimes what will shift someone's vision on an issue is a personal story, and that's usually more effective. So telling stories from our partner's perspective or from your perspective that will have an impact on how the member will see the issue. And then going into this specific ask that you want the member of Congress, what action you want them to take. And that's really important. I think educational visits are important, especially around issues like Syria, where a lot of information, they need to learn a lot of information because there's so much misinformation out there. But it's also very important to have a specific thing that you are asking them to do, whether it's a bill or to speak out or to contact the administration. And one thing I didn't say at the beginning is it's always important to thank your member of Congress. So it's always good to start off, even if it's just thank you for taking the time to meet with us. So, it's good to find, like when you're researching the member of Congress, if they have done anything that you can thank them for, even not necessarily on Syria, but anything that you can thank them for, to thank them for that. So this just goes a little more in depth into the actual roles of the meeting or the functions. And then one of the most important things is to not consider it just a one-off meeting. It's important to develop a relationship with your member of Congress. So you can do that by calling into their town halls, asking them questions, and after this first meeting to follow up with them. So it's unlikely you're going to change their opinion in the first meeting, but if you're persistent and you continue to meet with them and you get your friends and other people in your community to also contact them, it's much more likely you'll have an influence. So what if your member of Congress asks you a question that you can't answer? That's okay. You don't have to be the expert. The most important thing is that you are concerned about this issue. It's important to you and you want them to take action on it. So if they ask you a question that you can't answer, write it down, say that you will need to look into it and you can get back to them. So it's really important not to think that you have to be an expert. I think that sometimes shuts people down from thinking that they can do advocacy visits. You don't have to be an expert. What matters is that you have personal stories to tell, that you are concerned about this issue, that you are a person of faith in their district who wants them to know about this issue and why it's important. So you can debrief your meeting after with your group, and then follow up with your member of Congress, send a thank you note. You can also telephone your member of Congress if it's an urgent issue instead of doing the in-person visit. That's more of a they sort of they count the number of phone calls they get on certain issues. So if it's a vote coming up the next day, telephoning your member of Congress and leaving a message is also a good way to advocate. And then right now, because of COVID, they are doing virtual visits. So we've had some interesting opportunities to meet with members of Congress and bring our partners. Like we had El Marie come into one of our meetings and other partners on the ground in Syria that have been able to have more access to our members of Congress through these virtual means. I don't know how that's going to change now that we might be moving back to normal, but you still have, even though we're in this COVID time, you can still have a meeting with your member of Congress. So letters are a good tool, handwritten letters, but it takes a long time due to security issues. So if it's just something that's not that urgent and you'd like to write a personal note, that's good. The handwritten letters usually carry a lot of weight. Emails are another good way for time sensitive. It's similar to phone calls. They're able to count the number of emails that they get, and that's how they see the bulk number of whether their constituents are engaged on that issue. And then there's also letters to the editor, and this is a good tool. And I think particularly now with this issue of Syria, that there's so much misinformation, and most of the stories are on one side of the issue. Being intentional about following the stories on Syria that are printed and writing short op-eds. The network could have a sample op-ed for people that could be, you could edit it to fit whatever story you're wanting to respond to, and send that in and hope that it gets printed. There's also social media and Facebook. The members of Congress look at Twitter and Facebook, so you can tweet at your members of Congress and they will see that. And then there are other ways like hosting an interfaith vigil. And how am I doing on time?
I think we're about ready to wind up this part.
Okay, so I'll stop there to see if you have any questions or concerns.
So if you'd like to voice your questions, you can unmute yourself and ask Catherine.
So I really like your document, and you said that would be sent to all of us. Is it also available on your website?
We have an older version that's available on our website. This newer version is not. Hopefully it will be in the, we just realized today that it was not available on our website. So hopefully it will be in the next few days.
But we would like to send this out to all the participants.
Yeah, I believe I sent the document itself I sent as an attachment. So Anne and Ed have the older version of the document and the newer that you can send out. It won't be a link, but it'll be a document.